can switch? It's better, yes. Otherwise, I'm going to be up. Okay, so CBDCs are what will bring us in the digital space when we talk about payments. You know, we used to write letters with ink and so on. Now we send emails. We used to make phone calls with phone line, and now we do video calls. We used to use cash. We still do to some extent. But the future is the digital representation of cash. So CBDCs, here you can read E, C, and Y. That's the digital renminbi. Okay? So that's already been issued by the People's Bank of China. Next slide. Next slide. Okay. So are they really useful, these things? So that's the question that lots of people have asked, and including at the highest possible level. You know, the House of Lords in the UK promoted a report that was actually titled Central Bank Digital Currencies, a Solutions in Search of a Problem. So when they issued that, that is around 3 years ago, 13th of January 2022, they did a bit of an investigation, said, yeah, it seems like an interesting concept, but it's really unclear what is it for. And a couple of years later, they asked again the same question, but clearly they are shifting. And they say, is this still a solution in search of a problem? Or actually, have we understood a bit better what they are for? Next slide. So there are definitely microeconomic motivations behind CBDCs. One is to increase the efficiency of cash management. For example, the sound dollars in the Bahamas. And then to increase the efficiency of payments, especially when it's cross-border. No. Then to respond to the competition of private sector in money, doing some more targeted policy making, for example, in terms of fiscal policy. We can discuss in Q&A if you want. And then I would say, and that's why it's highlighted in red here, is to provide a public safe assets in people's digital wallet. Next slide. In fact, you can see here there's a study by the Bank of England that shows that in periods of heightened volatility, people will want to have a CBDC, okay? The demand for CBDC increased a lot. Effectively, what happens is the digital equivalent of what happens in real life. There used to be bank runs. So when there are troubles in the financial system, what do? You go to the bank to withdraw your cash. The same would happen when there's a problem in the digital space. People will want to sell their crypto assets and go into something digital while remaining in the digital wallets, and that is going to be the CBDC. But we'll see this later on again. In effect, you need all three components of this digital asset space, which are CBDCs, I would say the foundation of trust, what you need to make sure that the other two aspects are trustworthy, and on top of them, stable coins and crypto assets that are effectively the volatile and speculative assets in the digital asset space. Okay, so the Americans are more promoting this market-oriented approach. The Europeans and the Chinese are more promoting this state-backed solution. Next slide. Okay, these are the micro motivations. So in effect, CBDCs do provide a solution to real problems. So I think we have solved the House of Lords puzzle, if you want. But I think there are much deeper motivations behind the introduction of CBDCs, and these are geopolitical in nature. Next slide. For Europe is to promote what they call strategic autonomy. Okay, so the Europeans are tied to the US, and they feel under siege by the Chinese in so many respects, in so many sectors, and so they believe that in order to promote their own autonomy, they need to have at least their own system of digital assets. To be honest, they would need a unified system of even credit card schemes, because as you can tell, even the card schemes that are that do exist at European level are not unified at all. So it's very hard to even think about the banking union, let alone a capital markets union, if you don't even have a European-wide national credit card scheme. Okay? So they see the digital euro as a way of promoting that. Next slide. What are the motivation for introducing CBDCs in China? Well, there are two. One is more domestic, one is more international. So the domestic one is regaining control of the payments that were happening outside the circuit of the central bank through private sector solutions such as Alipay and WeChat Pay. And to some extent promote, okay, some form of domestic surveillance, which is something that the autocratic regimes of China is relatively keen on. But the other thing, the international motivation, is effectively the internationalization of the RMB, okay? The renminbi. Please. Okay, so regarding the domestic solution, recently a book has been written about all this by Chinese authors, and they speak about the surveillance state, okay? So effectively the Chinese government looking in all aspects of your life, and so there's, you know, with patent violations to privacy. But privacy is not even conceived the same way it's considered in the Western world. But even if you move from an autocratic state such as China to a liberal democracy such as the US with a capitalist system, the situation is not different. Shoshana Zuboff has written a book on this called The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. So it looks like whether it's a democracy or an autocracy, whether it's a centralized economy or capitalist economy, we are all subject to some form of surveillance. And I think this will be the case for the foreseeable future. Next slide. If instead we move to the second part, the international part, the one when we discuss about the geopolitical motivations behind CBDCs, there's kind of a clear timeline. It's like everything has been talked through quite intensely. It's just we didn't realize fast enough. In fact, we started discussing about these things in 2022, more or less. So 8 years after, they've actually launched the CBDC project, which was started almost immediately. So in 2012, Xi Jinping got elected in his various roles. Then in 2013, he launched the BRI initiative. First of all, the belt. In September and October, the road. The road is maritime, the belt is terrestrial. Then in 2014, the CBDC project was launched. And in 2015, the Digital Silk Road. What's the Digital Silk Road? Next slide. So this is the Belt and Road Initiative. So these are all countries that have signed to the Belt and Road Initiative. And as you can tell, is by now around 80% of the countries in the world, representing more or less 75% of the world population and 50% of the world GDP. Okay? So China is at the center, and then you have all these signatories countries, especially in Southeast Asia, Central Asia, Africa, Middle East, and to some extent Latin America. Okay? So that's the BRI. Next slide. But the digital equivalent of the BRI, it's called the Digital Silk Road. So the BRI is a project by which China builds the physical infrastructure in countries that have signed for the initiative. Okay, roads, ports, railways, airports, and all of that. The Digital Silk Road is a sister project by which China builds the digital infrastructure. Next slide. Anything that has to do with 5G, data centers, e-commerce, e-governance, fintech, anything that has to do with the digital infrastructure of a country. Next slide, please. A key component of that, if you want, is the alternative payment system that they have. CIPS, cross-border international payment systems, as you can see, is centered around China, but it does go into all the countries of the Belt and Road Initiative. It's actually present also in the US. South America, and so on. And that proved extremely important when Russia was kicked out of SWIFT, as we will see in a minute or so. Next slide. Okay, so along the countries of the Belt and Road Initiative, China goes with some form of comprehensive offer. Okay. 3 minutes. Oh wow. Okay. I thought it had to be longer. Okay, so we can skip this one then. So what is China building? China is building the rails on which the payment system of the future will run. Okay. The question is, what train is going to run on that? And here is the important point. It doesn't need to be necessarily a Chinese train, because if China offers the rails, then it controls what trains will be running there. When people speak about potential de-dollarization, okay, and people speak about the BRICS currency, well, the BRICS currency cannot, as a former central banker, I can tell you, it doesn't exist in nature. It's almost impossible, okay? But what you can tell is build the digital assets, okay, that is kind of a basket of currencies that will run on a Chinese infrastructure. That can work, okay? So that's the version of the BRICS currency, however you want to call it, that can actually work. Next slide. Next. What I wanted to show you here is that the map of the BRI, of the Digital Silk Road, and of CBDCs start resembling very, very closely the map of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which instead is effectively a security organization, so a military alliance of sorts. Okay, so next slide. Effectively, what is happening is that you start having a very close mapping, I would say, between the China-led initiative, whether it is the BRI, Digital Silk Road, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, or the BRICS Plus organization, okay, they are all starting to look more or less the same versus the Western alliance that is somehow represented by the G7 and to some extent NATO, because also G7 and NATO tend to overlap. So effectively, what I'm saying is that the military alliances that have been forming in the last few decades are now being replicated in the payment system and in the payment system infrastructure. And therefore, controlling this payment system in those countries will effectively allow China to dominate over those countries and promote a further polarization of the world, a Balkanization of the world in which China dominates over this, let's call it, eastern part and to some extent the global south, and the US is kind of confined to North America and Europe. So if I don't have more time, do I have 1 more minute? I don't know.
Yes, just go ahead. We want to hear it.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead. People want to hear it. Okay, so the question is, given all this, are the US and China destined for war? Well, that's a question that Graham Allison from Harvard asked himself. And the answer is, we don't know. But what we do know is that, next slide, we do have a Cold War between US and China. And this Cold War between US and China has 3 legs, okay? A trade war, a tech war, and a disruption of global supply chains, okay? In the tech war, please, next slide, we have 8 dimensions, okay? Big data, AI, cyber warfare, quantum computing, and whatever. And one of them is CBDCs, as I was saying. So I think I need to stop here unless...
1 minute.
1 minute, that's it. They want to hear, apparently.
That's why I said 1 minute.
Yes, okay. Next slide. That's it. We don't have time for the spy story. I'll go in Go to the very last slide. Okay. Yeah, that's it. This one. So, if we do have these two main actors in the global scene, say the US and its allies, China and its allies, okay, as I was saying before, the US will go very deep into crypto and stable coins where they do have a dominance, okay, and the EU and China will try to resist or to advance their beliefs to some extent by using CBDCs, okay. So you shouldn't be totally surprised of what you have heard in the last 24 to 48 hours with the launch of the Donald Trump and so on and so forth, and the Melania and all this kind of stuff, because that's how the US, to some extent, are fighting this war against China, okay? And there will be more of it in coming future, and more than happy to continue discussing in whatever venture. Well, thank you very much for your attention.